Main event of the evening. If he isn't as an
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing the 10th episode of the 11th season of Happy Days, Kiss Me Teach. And this is one of the episodes where we have to put a content warning on it because this episode includes a depiction of sexual assault.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Kiss Me Teach.
Marion and Joanie are getting dinner ready, and they're on the verge of getting into a fight because Marion feels like Joanie does whatever she wants without any regard for Marion's opinions.
Fine, go ahead. Doesn't matter because you're going to do what you want to do anyway. Oh.
Howard arrives home, along with Chachi, who wants to bum dinner off of the Cunninghams. Marion tells Howard to straighten Joanie out, and Joanie explains she's been accepted into a special teacher's assistant program at college. But that's not what Marion is upset about, it's that the school she'll be at is Patton.
And where is this classroom located?
The George S. Patton Vocational High School.
Joanie doesn't want to risk getting kicked out of the program at all, and she knows Howard will end up agreeing with Marion. So she asks Chachi what he thinks. He also thinks Patton is too tough for Joanie, and she tells him to jump off a cliff. He leaves to go get Fonzie, and brings him down as Marion and Joanie start arguing again. When Joanie threatens to move in with Jenny Piccolo near a Marine base, he intervenes. And once he hears the situation, he explains he knows, and he's on Joanie's side.
Nobody, and I repeat, nobody wants her to live near a Marine base with Jenny Piccolo. No!
He's the dean, he'll be there to protect her. Joanie and Marion are both set in their decisions, but Howard has decided to support Joanie. She's an adult, and she can make her own decisions. He reminds Marion she said before that they need to do just that, and Joanie assures her mother she'll be fine. The next day at Patton, Mrs. Schellenbach is having a hard time controlling her class.
Miss, you little scum warlord!
Fonzie and Joanie arrive, and he directs her to ignore the chalk outline on the floor. He introduces the new teacher's assistant to the teacher and then to the class.
All right, you're going to treat her with great respect for two reasons. One, she's very, very good. For two, if you don't, we'll do this.
Mrs. Schellenbach excuses herself with plane tickets. She won't be back until Monday. Alone with the students, Joanie asks for the seating charts. One kid says there's one in the desk drawer, but it's just the old jumping snake prank. Joanie isn't impressed, and she won't let Joey go to the bathroom until he raises his hand and asks may instead of can.
I'm sure you can go to the bathroom. I'm sure you've gone to the bathroom before. But if you'd like to use proper English, you may go to the bathroom.
When one kid is asked to read from the textbook, he instead reads from a racy romance novel. Another kid, Frankie, tells him to knock it off, and Joanie thanks him. As class comes to an end, Joanie says it wasn't that long ago that she was a high school senior, and they're not so different, and she wants to help them any way she can. The bell rings, and all the students leave, except for Frankie. He asks for help, and she agrees.
You really mean what you said about giving extra help?
Sure, whatever I can do.
He promised his mom he'd graduate this year. The next night at the Cunningham house, Chachi is going bowling with Howard and Marion. Frankie shows up, wanting the help that Joanie promised, and while she's surprised to see him, she agrees. But Chachi doesn't trust him, and he takes the assembled Cunninghams into the kitchen to say so.
Family meeting in the kitchen. Let's go. And Joanie, too. This is important. Trust me.
Joanie, kitchen, please.
My parents, they still think I'm their daughter.
Guys that age only have one thing on their mind. And when Joanie says Chachi is practically his age, Chachi says that's how he knows. Joanie refuses to indulge in paranoid fantasies and goes to help Frankie. Once they're alone, Frankie puts his arm around Joanie, and Chachi comes back in at the exact wrong time. He and Frankie talk tough to each other.
You better be picking lint off her sleeve.
And Joanie tells Frankie to meet her at school the next day. Frankie storms out, and Joanie tells Chachi off. She can handle one student with a crush on her. Chachi doesn't believe her.
This happens again, right? Now what are you going to do about it?
Something.
Like what?
Like something.
Tell me, what?
I said something.
The next day at school, Frankie is trying a little too hard to help Joanie when she's collecting papers. She notices one student didn't turn in his homework, and quickly identifies him as Chachi undercover.
What's your name?
It's Guido. Guido Templeton.
She drags him into the corner to chew him out, and then Howard comes out of a closet and leaves. Chachi chases after him. He was his ride. Joanie tries to start teaching again, but the fire alarm starts to ring, and Joanie directs the students out. But Frankie stays, and he locks the door.
Your love machine's here and he's on free play.
Joanie tries to talk to him about why his behavior last night was inappropriate, and as her protestations get stronger, Frankie pins her against the wall. She cries out for help as he starts to get rough, and then in bursts Fonzie. He tells Frankie he's dead, and Frankie jumps out the window. Fonzie comforts her crying Joanie, and she says she failed. She couldn't handle Frankie on her own. Fonzie assures her that being able to beat up her students is not her metric of success.
You're not here to see if you can beat up these guys. That's my job.
And Frankie was just one bad egg. Joanie admits there were moments when she could see one student start to understand. Fonzie says it's because she's a teacher, and she'll be a great one.
Well, let's get out of here.
Okay.
All right. Here we go.
Thank you, Peter. That was Kiss Me Teach. It first aired back on January 10th, 1984. This was the first new episode of 1984. Just Our Luck had been canceled by then. Aww. So Happy Days now followed a new show called Foul-Ups, Bleeps, and Blunders, hosted by Steve Lawrence and Don Rickles.
Tuesday, if they blow it, we'll show it. Foul-Ups, Bleeps, and Blunders right before Happy Days. Tuesday.
It consists of outtakes from movies and TV shows and is a blatant copy of NBC's TV's Bloopers and Practical Jokes, which premiered just a day earlier. ABC was very nervous about having insult comedian Don Rickles on this new show and did whatever they could to limit his presence on the air. The premiere got huge ratings because people tuned in to see what Rickles would do, but once viewers saw that Rickles was muzzled by the network, the ratings dropped dramatically. CBS had a new episode of The Mississippi called Going Back to Hannibal.
I don't think so.
They came in third for the hour with that, and NBC still won the hour with a new episode of The A-Team, in which a reporter goes undercover as a computer operator to help the team foil a terrorist plot to kidnap a sheik.
Thank you! Thank you, Mr. Sheik!
So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
I feel like that if I had actually been alive when this episode originally aired, I would have been one of the many people to watch the blooper special for Don Rickles and get disappointed halfway through and turn it off. So that's my answer.
I definitely did the same thing in 1984. Kiss Me Teach was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by our pal, Fred Fox Jr. The most recent of Fred's episodes we covered was Glove Story. As for guest stars this week, let's start with Edward Eddie Hartz as Frankie.
I promised my mom I would graduate this year.
Eddie only has one other screen credit, a 1985 drama called Stand Alone, starring Charles Durning, Pam Grier, and James Keach. Peter, what did you think of Eddie Hartz as Frankie?
Well, this is not a particularly likable or interesting or rewarding role. I don't necessarily think that's his fault, but he doesn't really do much to make the role compelling or enjoyable to watch. Maybe that's for the best. If he had been a more likable character, that would have made the episode even worse in a sense. This is one of those cases where it's very hard to separate the performance from the character, and I hate the character, so yeah.
It's difficult to know what to say about this as a performance, as a bit of acting. Eddie Hartz does make the character convincingly creepy and threatening. It's maybe not the most flattering showcase for an actor, but it's a part that somebody had to play. There are some close-ups of Frankie leering at Joanie that I found very disturbing in this episode.
Yeah.
He manages to convey a lot of creepy, threatening attitude in those shots. We also have Anthony Tompkins as Dexter, another student in Joanie's class.
A pronoun is a noun that gets paid for being in a sentence.
Anthony is an actor from Colorado who worked quite a lot in TV in the 70s and 80s. You could have seen him on The Jeffersons, Good Times, Different Strokes, Tales from the Dark Side, T.J. Hooker, Kids Incorporated, and 21 Jump Street. He's also in the Spike Lee movie School Days as a character called Doo-Doo Breath.
Half pint.
Peter, what did you think of Anthony Tompkins as Dexter?
It's a pretty small role. He's just one of many students who talks back to Joanie. I also think it's probably noteworthy that he is one of very few black students that we see at Patton. I think he might be the only one that we've seen so far. Going slightly against the stereotype of the scary inner city school, Patton is pretty much almost entirely white, which might owe more to the fact that this is 1960s Milwaukee than to any deliberate attempt at subversion on the part of the show.
Dexter is one of Happy Days' many smart-alecky, wisecracking teenage kids. The typical kind of knucklehead that you might have even seen at Jefferson High. And I don't think race really has much to do with his character, so maybe that's a sign of progress on Happy Days' part.
This doesn't necessarily seem to be a role that specifically called for black actors, so you know, there's that.
Finally, Catherine Fuller and Stephen Baio return as Mrs. Schellenbach and Joey Molansky, respectively. Any thoughts there on these two actors?
I was very happy to see Mrs. Schellenbach back.
Always glad to have reinforcements.
I like her a lot for reasons I can't quite explain.
I think this is the last time we'll see either of these characters. Are you going to miss them?
I'm going to miss Mrs. Schellenbach a lot. Then again, I guess if she never comes back, I guess you can explain that she got on a plane and she never came back to Milwaukee or Patton. And you know what? Good for her. I hope she had a very happy retirement.
I do too. I'm glad she got out. As for songs this week, there are none. This is not that kind of episode, unfortunately. So let's move on to cultural and historical references. Chachi says that graduates of Patton are given $5 and a cheap suit.
I mean, at graduation, they don't give you a diploma. They give you $5 and a cheap suit.
There is supposedly a tradition that men leaving prison are given $20 and a new suit, but the truth is a little more complicated. Prisoners are given what is called gate money when they are discharged, but it varies depending on how much they earned while in prison. The new suit part appears to be an urban myth.
I guess that I just came of age at a time when we no longer give prisoners $20 and a new suit.
I see it in old movies, like from the 40s and 50s, that happens. Joanie threatens to move to the Marine base with Jenny Piccolo.
Tell Dad his daughter is living at the Marine base with Johnny Piccolo. Ah!
There are no Marine bases in Wisconsin or anywhere near it. The closest is in Washington, D.C. So maybe that's where Jenny Piccolo is right now?
That could have been its own spin-off. Jenny Piccolo as a young woman trying to make her way in the 1960s, and she's trying to get the attention of all these Marines.
That could have been more fun than Joanie Loves Chachi. Fonzie says, I heard it through the grapevine.
I know.
You do?
Yeah, I heard it. Through the grapevine.
This was a huge hit for Gladys Knight and the Pips in 1967, and then an even bigger hit for Marvin Gaye in 1968. This is more proof that Berry Gordy is sending Motown songs to Fonzie first to see if he likes them.
That would explain a lot.
The atmosphere is spoiled for me just a bit when a 1972 AMC Gremlin drives by the school.
American Motors Gremlin is the little economy car that doesn't economize on the engine.
That hatchback is unmistakable.
Now that you've brought it up, that's going to be another thing about this episode that bothers me, albeit not to the extent of the rest of it.
The next time we see the outsider Patton, a truck carrying Old Milwaukee beer drives by. That was a nice touch.
Old Milwaukee is named after the city that means beer.
There is some speculation online that the classroom in this episode reuses the set from Welcome Back, Kotter. But a side-by-side comparison shows that this just isn't true. The sets are somewhat similar, but not the same. The Kotter set is a lot smaller, for one thing, with the windows much closer to the blackboard. Joanie's students play a prank on her involving spring-loaded snakes.
And then you open it up, and then snakes fly out! Ah!
Fonzie's students played that same prank way back in Fonzie the Substitute back in Season 9. This was one of the many gag items invented by Soren Sorensen Adams, who also created the Joy Buzzer and the Dribble Glass. Joanie says the prank is old, and indeed it goes back to 1915. We talked about that prank back then. I don't think I've ever seen it played on anyone in real life. Have you?
Well, no, because everybody knows it, and therefore it's not really a surprise.
I think the best time to get someone with this gag was the 1800s.
Frankie says Chachi is dressed like a cab.
Why don't you tell the guy who's dressed like a cab to leave us in peace?
Checker Taxi was a Chicago-based cab company that operated from the 1930s to the 1980s. Their iconic cabs with the checkerboard pattern are seen prominently in TV shows like Taxi and Friends, as well as the movie Taxi Driver.
I go all over. I take people to the Bronx, Brooklyn. I take them to Harlem. I don't care.
When you think of a taxi cab, do you still think of the vehicle with the checkerboard pattern on the side?
Now that you mention it, yes, I do. I don't think about taxis very often because, once again, I came of age in a post-taxi world. Now it's all Ubers and Lyfts and other ride shares.
Chachi says they'll find out if doctors still make house calls.
We'll find out if doctors still make house calls.
Yo, I'm scared.
All right, let's go,
yeah.
House calls were being phased out in the 1960s due to their economic inefficiency. That's when doctors started insisting on patients coming into the office. And I can definitely say that house calls were long gone by the time I came along. Chachi keeps a box of Milk Duds in his shirt sleeve.
Milk Duds?
I don't smoke.
In the 1950s and 60s, it was common for wannabe tough guys and juvenile delinquents to keep packs of cigarettes rolled up in the sleeves of their T-shirts. This trend was made possible by two advancements: the acceptance of T-shirts as outerwear and the invention of the more durable flip-top cigarette case from Philip Morris. It's a little alarming that the students in a class called Senior English would still be learning what pronouns are.
Going 209. You know what that is? Senior English. That's you. You're going to go in there. You're going to be great.
Parts of speech are generally taught between grades 3 and 6.
Patton might not have a very good curriculum.
I'm beginning to suspect that is true. And Fonzie jokes about the Empire State Building being in downtown Milwaukee.
If that's the definition of failure, man, everybody in Milwaukee's going to have to run downtown and jump off the Empire State Building.
We just talked about that Art Deco New York office building in the Ballad of Joanie and Chachi, if you really want to know what we thought about it.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Other observations this week. After Joanie dumps the silverware on the table, I was surprised that Marion would let her get the glasses.
Fine, I'll do the silverware. Fine. You want me to do the glasses too?
I thought for sure that was going to be a joke where Marion would say, on second thought, don't go get the glasses. Even if Marion is having an argument with Joanie, she still wouldn't want her glasses to be smashed up.
Yeah, you'd have to get whole new glasses. That's a whole thing.
Went into your locker and I smashed your glasses.
You'd have to clean up the smashed glasses, and then you couldn't go barefoot in your house anymore because you'd have to wear shoes, lest you risk stepping on shattered glass. This has happened to me before.
It was nice to get a reference this week to Jenny Piccolo, though we don't see her. Potsy and Roger are also mentioned but not seen. I've heard this was all a budgetary thing where they couldn't afford to pay the actors to be on camera, so they would just mention them.
Someone who I can't see, nor will I ever see, just fell into some butterscotch.
What do you think of that technique on the show, Peter?
It does create the sense that the characters are still around. They're not going to show up because of the aforementioned budget constraints, but they are still around. I do like the confirmation that Jenny Piccolo still exists, even if she's not going to show up except for like once this season. That is better than some of the characters get, like Casey and the Belvins.
Being mentioned is better than just being forgotten.
Being Chuck Cunningham.
Joey says he lost interest in going to the bathroom.
Never mind, I lost interest. Yeah.
What exactly was he planning to do in the bathroom?
Well, as the song leads me to believe, there's a lot of smoking that goes on in the boys' room.
Everybody knows that smoking ain't allowed in school.
I don't even want to say what I thought was going to go on with Joey.
Oh, God. Now I'm thinking about it.
And it's Scott Baio's brother, too, so I don't know. That makes it worse. The blonde student with the bouffant from You Get What You Pay For is back in this episode. She still doesn't get a name. They could have given her a name. Wouldn't that have been kind of cool that the one girl student gets a personality and stuff?
We should give her a name. What's a good 1960s tough girl name? Buffy?
Buffy would be great. Oh, that's tough, too. Buffy the Toughie.
Yeah.
I want to know about the one member of the studio audience who applauds when Frankie puts his arm around Joanie.
You know, you just better be picking lint off my sleeve.
What plot did he think he was watching? Did he think that this was going to be a love story between a teacher and her student? Did he not get all of the very obvious telegraphing that Joanie is really uncomfortable with this?
Or maybe he identifies with Frankie, which is a horrifying thought. Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in this episode?
I liked the bowling shirts. They were this very bright yellow with dark patterns on the collars and the shoulders. I liked them a lot.
So then, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question, was this episode any good?
No. This entire episode is about everyone believing that Joanie is going to be in danger by going to work at Patton, and it turns out that they're right, because one of the students pretty much immediately tries to assault her. I don't think the episode is quite as victim-blamey as it could have been. Fonzie does tell her at the end, yeah, you shouldn't have to worry about that at this school, and she does keep teaching at Patton, but also they are confirming that everyone was right to be worried, and Joanie can't go anywhere without the possibility of that happening, specifically at Patton. The way the assault itself is handled, it goes from this incredibly horrific, violent thing that happens to a lot of people, especially women, to the very cartoony part of Frankie literally jumping out the window. I don't like this episode.
This was a very difficult one to get through. You had some qualms about how the school and the students were portrayed in vocational education. This one really portrays the student body of Patton in a dark and ugly, threatening way that I thought was very off-putting. Joanie is basically saved by a deus ex machina at the end of the episode, a Fonzie ex machina. I don't think Happy Days really has the skills to deal with this kind of thing effectively. It's not that kind of show. This is a light entertainment program that generally focuses on silly sitcom stories, like they did last week with the plumbing exploding. That's the kind of story that they can do effectively. This is not the kind of story that they can do effectively. So
yeah, and like you mentioned, that episode was probably meant to come after this one. Joanie goes from almost getting sexually assaulted to this goofy story about the students trying to make a new bathroom in her house. That's just like, wow, that's really makes the whole thing more surreal.
Happy Days is never able to settle on a tone when it comes to depicting Patton. Are these kids just lovable goofballs, or are they really threatening? There's really nothing I can say in defense of Kiss Me Teach. The only people who should watch it are people who are watching literally every episode of Happy Days to review them for a podcast. Everyone else can safely steer clear of this one. I don't know what they were thinking. Maybe they thought this was a very special episode and they were going to teach us all a lesson. I don't know what that lesson could possibly have been. So, Peter, how can people keep in touch with us and find out about all the wonderful things we are doing?
Listeners can follow me on Blue Sky at petervolfranc.bsky.social. We are still on X for the time being. Probably not for much longer, because X will probably not exist for much longer. One day it's just literally no longer going to function.
Instead of that, you can follow me on Blue Sky at joeblevins.bsky.social. You can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com, and you can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast at gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, it's also about a very serious topic. Fonzie is accused of hitting a student, and he is put on trial in The People versus the Fonz.
What has happened to Happy Days? Why are they doing all these dark stories about Patton, Peter?
I hope it's better than this one, at least.
I hope so, too. I guess we'll see next week. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Midnight, were the stars and you. Midnight, and a rendezvous. Your eyes held a message tender, saying I surrender all my love to you. Midnight brought us sweet romance. I know all my whole life through I'll be remembering you, whatever else I do. Midnight, where the stars and you.
Guido Templeton.